My name is Emily, and I reside in a small, quiet town in Maine, a place where the pace of life is slow and the air is fresh. My husband, John, is a good man at heart, but he harbors a dark side that emerges when he drinks. It's a troubling transformation that turns him into someone unpredictable and, at times, even violent. This unsettling aspect of his personality is one that I have come to fear deeply, a fear that lingers in the shadows of our home, our house, which should be a sanctuary filled with love and warmth, has recently morphed into something far more sinister, feeling more like a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. I find myself walking on eggshells, constantly trying to gauge John's moods and emotions, hoping to sidestep the inevitable outburst that seems to loom over us like a dark cloud. It's an incredibly lonely existence, filled with anxiety and a profound sense of unease that settles in my chest like a heavy stone. We have a son named Zach, who is now 17 years old. Zach is not John's biological son. I brought him into our marriage from a previous relationship. He is a quiet and observant young man, thoughtful and respectful, always showing deference to John, even when the atmosphere in our home grows tense. However, I have noticed a shift in Zach lately. He has become increasingly protective of me, his eyes flashing with a fierce anger whenever John has indulged in too much alcohol. I can't help but wonder if Zach senses the tension that permeates our home, the underlying fear that I work so hard to conceal from him tonight. John came home later than usual, his footsteps heavy and unsteady on the stairs. The moment I heard him, I knew he had been drinking. My heart raced in my chest as I waited for him in the living room, trying to maintain a facade of calmness, though my hands trembled slightly, betraying my anxiety. He stumbled into the room, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused, his words slurred together. "Where were you?" he demanded, his voice dripping with accusation and hostility. "I was right here, John," I replied softly, striving to diffuse the escalating tension. "I made dinner for us." He scoffed dismissively, his expression hardening. "I don't want your damn dinners." In a fit of rage, he grabbed a glass from the table and hurled it against the wall. It shattered into a million glimmering pieces, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. I flinched at the noise, my body tensing instinctively. I had witnessed this side of him before, and it always filled me with terror and dread. "John, please," I begged, my voice trembling with fear. "Don't do this. We can talk about it." He ignored my pleas, advancing toward me with a menacing glare, his eyes burning with rage. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you?" he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "You think I'm not good enough for you?" "No, John, that's not what I think at all," I said, backing away from him, my heart racing. "Please, just calm down and let's talk." In a sudden burst of aggression, he lunged at me, grabbing my arm with a grip that was tight and bruising. I cried out in pain as he held me close, his face inches from mine, filled with fury. "You're going to regret this," he hissed, his breath hot against my skin. "You're going to regret everything you've done." Just then, Zach appeared, rushing into the room and pulling John away from me with surprising strength. "Leave her alone," he shouted, his voice filled with an intensity one had never heard before, a fury that radiated from him like an electric current. John stumbled backward, caught off guard by Zach's sudden intervention. He glared at his stepson, his expression darkening. "You think you're so tough, huh?" he sneered, his voice laced with contempt. "You think you can take me on?" Zach stood his ground, unwavering and resolute, his fists clenched at his sides. "I won't let you hurt her anymore," he declared, his voice steady and unwavering, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding us. John let out a harsh, mocking laugh, an ugly sound that echoed in the room. "You and what army?" he taunted, dismissing Zach's bravery. Zach didn't flinch or back down. He simply locked eyes with John, his gaze filled with a quiet determination that was both fierce and unwavering. In an instant, John took a step toward Zach, raising his hand as if to strike him. But before he could make contact, Zach moved with astonishing speed. He ducked under John's arm and delivered a swift kick to his legs. John crumpled to the floor, groaning in pain, the fight momentarily knocked out of him. I stared at Zach in disbelief, my heart pounding in my chest. I had never seen him like this before. Always so quiet, so reserved. But now, he was a force to be reckoned with, standing tall and unyielding. He turned to me, his eyes filled with concern and care. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice gentle and soothing. That I nodded, tears streaming down my face as relief washed over me. "Yes, I'm okay," I said, my voice shaky but grateful.
"Thank you, Zach.
"You were so brave." He helped me to my feet, his touch sending a strange shiver through me, a mix of gratitude and newfound admiration. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long while. He was taller than I remembered, his shoulders broadening into a protective stance, his eyes reflecting kindness and strength. There was a resilience about him that I hadn't noticed before, a spark of courage that shone brightly in the face of adversity.
"What do we do now?"
I asked, my voice trembling with uncertainty and fear. Zach glanced down at John, who was still lying on the floor, groaning and disoriented. "I don't know," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "But I won't let him hurt you again. I promise you that." The hospital truly became my second home, a place where time seemed to blur and everyday life fell away. Each day, I found myself sitting by John's bedside, hoping against hope that he would wake from the deep darkness that enveloped him. The doctor's words reverberated persistently in my mind, each phrase a painful reminder of the uncertainty that shrouded his condition. Severe head trauma, prognosis uncertain, could be permanent. I fought hard to suppress the encroaching fear that threatened to consume me, clinging to a fragile flicker of hope that sparkled faintly within my heart. It was as if that small light was all I had left to hold on to. I end those tumultuous days. Zach emerged as my unwavering rock, my steadfast support through the unrelenting storm. He drove me to the hospital, tirelessly sitting beside me during the seemingly endless hours of waiting, offering me quiet comfort whenever the overwhelming dread threatened to drown me. In those moments, he was my anchor, grounding me in the chaos. Strangely, he never mentioned that fateful night, the violence that had erupted, the way he had bravely defended me from harm. It felt as though a silent pact existed between us, a heavy shared secret that both of us recognized but dared not voice. Yet beneath the surface, the silence was thick with unspoken feelings and emotions we were both reluctant to confront. I would catch Zach watching me from time to time, his intense gaze lingering just a heartbeat too long, feeding my curiosity and anxiety in equal measure. There was a raw, palpable hunger in his eyes that ignited a fire within me, making my heart race uncontrollably. Deep down, I understood that he sensed it too, the forbidden attraction that seemed to vibrate between us like a live wire, crackling with unfulfilled potential. My feelings toward him transcended mere gratitude. They felt more profound, more perilous and intoxicating. With every gentle touch from him, a rush of electricity coursed through my veins, awakening senses I had long thought dulled by grief. His very presence filled the gaping void left by John's absence, a hollow space I hadn't even realized existed until Zach stepped forward to fill it with his quiet affection and unwavering support. One particularly stormy evening, I found Zach in the living room, his gaze fixed out the window as rain poured relentlessly from the sky. I stood in the doorway, peering at him with a heart heavy with an indescribable longing that twisted my insides. There was something deeply intimate about watching him, a vulnerability in his stillness that stirred an ache within me. "He's not coming back, is he?" Zach's voice broke the silence, low and filled with an emotion that carried the weight of his contemplation, as if he were speaking more to himself than to me. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask, my voice barely rising above a whisper, barely able to break the tension that surrounded us. "John," he clarified, finally turning to face me. "He's not coming back to us." I remained silent, allowing the truth of his words to sink in. I understood precisely what he meant. Even if John were to wake up one day, I knew that the man I had married was lost, likely forever trapped in the agonizing shadows of his addiction. Zach took a step closer, his eyes searching mine with a desperate intensity. "What are we going to do?" he asked softly, the uncertainty mirroring the turmoil within my heart. The truth was, I didn't have the slightest idea how to respond to that question. The only certainty I carried was an inability to deny the feelings that were becoming too potent to ignore, feelings that drew me toward Zach like a moth irresistibly attracted to a flame, even though I understood the potential consequences. I don't know, I admitted, my voice quivering with the weight of my uncertainty. But I don't want to be alone. In a gentle, reassuring gesture, Zach reached out and took my hand, his touch igniting a powerful shiver that raced down my spine. "You're not alone, Emily," he assured me softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "I'm here for you." We stood there, intertwined, our fingers laced together, the silence between us amplifying the unspoken desires that lingered just out of reach. The atmosphere crackled with tension, a frisson of electricity that hinted at the monumental shift taking place between us, a shift that we both sensed but didn't fully understand then. Without warning, he leaned in and kissed me. It started as a tentative kiss, a question spoken through the intimate language of our touch, but as our lips connected, the kiss deepened, growing more fervent and urgent. It became a kiss that shattered every boundary, a kiss that defied the very essence of what we were supposed to represent to one another. When we finally broke apart, breathless and flushed, the entire world seemed to tilt on its axis, a reality turned upside down. In that moment, we had crossed an invisible line, traversed past a point of no return. There was no turning back now. "I'm sorry," Zach murmured, his eyes awash with a tumult of emotion. Guilt, longing, uncertainty blended into one. "Don't be," I urged, my voice hoarse, knowing in that moment that I truly wanted this too. I wanted this as well. We stood together, wrapped in each other's embrace, the rain falling outside like a soothing lullaby, creating a cocoon of tranquility amidst our turbulent emotions. The world outside could pass judgment, condemn us for what we had done, but in this intimate moment, surrounded by the warmth of each other's arms, none of that mattered at all. The kiss felt like a transgression, an act that whispered of something forbidden between us. It lingered in the air, hanging like an unspoken promise, thick with the weight of desires left unacknowledged and the heavy burden of what we could never have outright. I pulled away slowly, my heart racing like a frantic drum echoing against my ribs, as if it were trying to escape the realization of what just happened. "We can't," I breathed, my voice trembling, the words spilling out in a rush, filled with a profound sense of regret. "It's wrong, Zach. So terribly wrong." His eyes searched mine, dark and intense, as if they were trying to pierce through my defenses. "Is it really wrong to feel this way?" he asked, his voice low and husky, weighted with a sincerity that took me aback. "Is it so wrong to want you, Emily?" The raw honesty in his question sent a shiver through me, making my breath catch in my throat. This wasn't merely the result of a teenage crush or a fleeting infatuation that would fade with time. No, this was something far deeper, something that resonated through my very being, a yearning I had buried so deep within myself that I had almost forgotten it existed. "It's not just about John," I finally mustered, my voice quaking with the intensity of my feelings. "It's everything. It's who we are together, what we represent to each other in this complex world." He stepped closer, crossing the invisible line that separated us. His hand reached out to brush a stray strand of hair from my face, a gesture so gentle yet so electrifying. "We're not children anymore, Emily," he said softly, his words wrapping around me like a warm embrace. "We're adults who have uncovered something extraordinary between us, something that is rare and precious. Are we really going to throw it all away simply because of what others might say or think?" His words struck a deep chord within me, reverberating through the layers of my consciousness. I had spent my entire life living for the approval of others, living for John and all the expectations society had placed on my shoulders. But what about my own desires? What about what I truly wanted for myself? "I'm scared, Zach," I admitted, the admissions tumbling out of me, filled with an unexpected vulnerability that surprised even myself. "I'm terrified of what might unfold if we dare to cross this unspoken line between us." He took my hand in his, the simple touch sending a jolt of electricity coursing through my veins, igniting every nerve ending in my body. "We'll face it together," he promised, his eyes brimming with a fierce determination that felt like a lifeline in the midst of my swirling doubts. "Whatever consequences arise, we'll confront them side by side." The promise contained in his words was intoxicating, pulling me closer to the edge of the abyss, like a siren call beckoning me to leap. I longed to believe him, to imagine a future where we could defy societal norms and find true happiness wrapped in each other's arms. Yet, a cautious voice within me reminded me that we were toying with fire, a fire that could consume us both, leaving nothing but ash in its wake. We stood there, hand in hand, the silence surrounding us heavy with unspoken emotions that swirled between us like an invisible fog. The air crackled with an overwhelming tension, a palpable longing that felt like a fragile thread stretched taut, ready to snap at any moment. "I should go," Zach said finally, his voice strained with unexpressed emotions. "Before things escalate too far between us." I nodded slowly, my heart sinking into the pit of my stomach. He was right. We were soaring dangerously close to the edge of a precipice, where one misstep could send us tumbling into the depths of darkness below. He gently released my hand, his touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary, as if he were afraid to let me go, as if he wanted to hold on to this moment just a fraction longer. "I won't stop thinking about you, Emily," he said, his voice a low murmur, filled with a sincerity I could feel deep within my heart. "You're in my mind, in my heart. I can't escape your presence, and I won't stop thinking about you, either." I managed to reply, my voice barely above a whisper, carrying the weight of all my hidden feelings. "You've awakened something in me, Zach. Something I thought had long since died and faded away." He smiled at me, a bittersweet expression that mirrored the chaos of emotions swirling within us both. "Then we're both in trouble," he said softly, acknowledging the beautiful mess that had just begun to intertwine our lives. The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances and whispered conversations. Zach and I existed in a world of our own, a bubble of forbidden passion that threatened to burst at any moment. We met in secret, in the quiet corners of the house, in the dead of night, when the world was asleep. Each touch, each kiss, was a rebellion, a defiance of the roles we were supposed to play, but our secret couldn't stay hidden forever. The tension between us was palpable, a living thing that pulsed with every shared breath. It was in the way Zach looked at me, his eyes filled with a longing that mirrored my own. It was in the way I lingered a moment too long when I touched his arm, a silent plea for something more. The truth was, I was falling deeper in love with Zach with each passing day. He was everything John wasn't: kind, gentle, and attentive. He saw me, really saw me, in a way that John never had. He made me feel alive, made me feel like I was worth something more than the role of a dutiful wife, but the guilt gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the line we'd crossed. I was betraying John, the man who'd given me a home, a life. I was betraying Zach, whose trust one was abusing with every stolen moment, and then there was the matter of my revenge. The anger I felt towards John, the desire to make him pay for what he'd done to me, was still very much alive. But now it was tangled with my feelings for Zach, creating a web of emotions that threatened to ensnare me completely. One night, Zach came to my room. He sat on the edge of my bed, his eyes searching mine. "We need to talk," he said, his voice serious. I knew what he wanted to talk about. We'd been avoiding the subject for too long, but the time had come to face the truth. "I love you, Emily," he said, his voice filled with a raw emotion that made my heart ache. "I love you more than anything in the world." I reached out and took his hand, my fingers intertwining with his. "I love you too, Zach," I whispered, the words heavy with the weight of our forbidden love. "What are we going to do?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. And I didn't have an answer. I only knew that I couldn't deny my feelings for him any longer. "I don't know," I said, my voice trembling. "But I know that I don't want to lose you." He pulled me closer, his arms wrapping around me in a protective embrace. "You won't lose me, Emily," he whispered in my ear. I'll never let you go. We clung to each other, two souls bound by a love that defied all logic and reason. In that moment, nothing else mattered. We were simply Emily and Zach, two people who'd found solace in each other's arms. John woke up to a world that no longer resembled the one he once knew. His recovery was not the miraculous, uplifting return to health the doctors had cautiously promised, but rather a slow, excruciating march back to consciousness. Each waking moment was a painful reminder that he was now but a shadow of the man he had once been, both physically weakened and mentally adrift. The fury that had once ignited his every action was now extinguished, replaced by a hollow emptiness that left him numb. In the dim light of his hospital room, fragments of memory floated in and out of focus. He recalled the accident, the collision of metal and chaos, as well as the explosive confrontation with Zach. There was a searing pain in his head that seemed to echo with every heartbeat. The details were elusive, as if they belonged to someone else's life, dreamlike and half-forgotten. Yet one horrifying truth remained etched in his mind. He had hurt Emily. The extent of his violence, the raw cruelty of his actions, was lost somewhere in the fog of his recollections, leaving him burdened with guilt he could barely comprehend. A few days into his recovery, Emily visited him. Her presence filled the sterile room with a cold detachment that sent shivers down his spine. Her face, once a beacon of love and hope, now appeared unreadable, a mask of controlled emotion. Emily recounted everything with a dispassionate clarity that cut him to the core. She spoke of the kiss, the unexpected tenderness that had sparked between her and Zach, a spark that grew into a flame in his absence. Every word was a reminder of what he had lost and what he could never reclaim. John listened in silence, his eyes fixed on hers as if trying to find a trace of the person he once adored. But there was nothing left to grasp, only a profound sadness that filled him with the heavy knowledge that he had not just alienated her, but had actively driven her away. In that moment, the cold truth settled over him. His inner demons, the rage that had once consumed him, had cost him the only person who had ever truly loved him. The day finally came when John was discharged from the hospital. He left behind the sterile white walls and the constant hum of machines, only to find that the world outside was equally barren. His home, once a sanctuary filled with the echoes of laughter and shared memories, now stood empty. Emily and Zach had vanished without a trace, leaving him alone in a house haunted by the ghosts of happier times. Every room was a reminder of his failure, a painful exhibit of what could have been if he had fought his inner turmoil. He searched desperately for any sign of them, wandering through empty streets and quiet neighborhoods, hoping for a glimpse of Emily's familiar smile or Zach's reassuring presence. But they were gone, swallowed up by the relentless tide of time and consequences. In the silent aftermath, John came to realize that his isolation was not merely physical, but deeply existential. The anger that had once defined him had transformed into an unyielding despair, and in its wake, he was left to confront the void he had created. Loneliness became his constant companion, a silent observer to every passing day. His thoughts spiraled into self-recrimination and regret, each one a vivid reminder of the bridges he had burned. The world moved on around him, indifferent to the internal torment that ravaged his soul. Neighbors passed by without a second glance, and friends, unsure of how to reach out, slowly drifted away. The love and support he had once taken for granted were now as distant as the memories of his past self. And the quiet solitude of his empty house, John began a painful journey of introspection. He tried to piece together the fragments of his shattered identity, hoping to understand where it had all gone wrong. Night after night, he lay awake, haunted by visions of the accident, the fight, and the irrevocable choices that had led him down this lonely path. He questioned whether there was any redemption to be found in the depths of his despair or if he was doomed to wander through life as a specter of regret. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the room in a melancholic glow, John sat at the kitchen table with a notebook in hand. With a trembling determination, he began to write down everything he could remember, every sensation, every emotion, every detail that might hold a clue to his lost self. The act of writing became both an exorcism and a search for meaning, a way to make sense of the chaos that had upended his life. In those long, solitary hours, he confronted the reality that he had brought upon himself, that the very demons he had tried so hard to suppress were now his constant companions. Though the pain was overwhelming, there was a fragile glimmer of hope buried within the sorrow. John realized that, despite the irreversible mistakes of his past, the future still held the possibility of change. The road to forgiveness, both from himself and from those he had hurt, would be long and fraught with challenges, but it was a journey he knew he had to embark upon if he ever wished to reclaim even a semblance of the man he once was. And so, with the first tentative steps into the unknown, John resolved to confront his inner darkness, one painful day at a time. Owen gradually came to understand that his life, once dominated by anger and regret, was now taking the shape of a difficult journey towards self-discovery and redemption. In the solitude of his home, every silent room echoed memories of past mistakes and lost love. The brutal lessons of his former life had carved deep scars, yet they also offered him the opportunity to rebuild his inner world. He realized that while the wounds of yesterday could never be completely healed, they could serve as a foundation for growth and renewal. Each new day provided John with a chance to confront his demons and gradually forgive himself for the pain he had caused. Embracing his vulnerability, he began to mend the broken pieces of his soul with careful determination. The process was slow and fraught with setbacks, but it also brought moments of quiet hope and clarity. By accepting responsibility for his actions, John learned that true change comes not from forgetting the past, but from transforming it into a lesson for the future. In this fragile balance of regret and hope, he discovered the possibility of a new beginning, one truly built on the promise of inner peace and redemption.